In today's video, we are going to go over how to cut really straight strips. Strip cutting is a pretty basic quilting tool, a pretty basic skill in quilting, but there are two tips that I wanted to share with you so you know you're going to cut straight strips from selvage to selvage, and you're not going to have any weird bowing in the middle, because that bowing is kind of like a little frown, and that's pretty sad when you're quilting. But the way we're going to do it, you're not going to get that. So I am demonstrating today with this really pretty Rifle Paper Company fabric. At the time of this video, this fabric just came out. We are going to be making strips for the Grow Quilt. This is for the Grow Quilt Sew Along, if you're following along with that on the blog. And the Grow Quilt, as you can see, is just strips. It's just straight strips. So fabric, which I'm sure you already know because you're a fabric genius, is made of threads. Is made of threads that are vertical and horizontal. You have the weft and the warp that weave together to create what we know as this beautiful stuff called fabric. So if we want to cut really straight strips, we have to cut our strips on grain. So you see that triangle quilt behind me? If we're cutting triangles, that means we're cutting some cuts off grain because they are at an angle. And that off grain is called a bias edge. And bias edges stretch, and they're really wonderful and stretchy, and they really cling to your body if you're wearing a bias cut dress. It's a wonderful thing. But we don't want any kind of stretchy or clingy or anything when we're cutting our very rigid, straight strips for the Grow Quilt. So tip number one is pre-wash your fabric. I know as quilters, it's really easy to just grab our fabric straight from the shopping bag. We just went to the fabric shop, and then we're gonna grab our rotary cutters and we're just gonna go for it. I know, that's like so fun. There's quite a thrill really to just the immediacy of that. But yeah, I'm not gonna let you do that with this quilt. I really want you to pre-wash. And that's because when fabric lives its life on the bolt, it gets stretched. It gets stretched around the bolt. And so that weft and warp that we just talked about, that also gets stretched. So when you're cutting your fabric, sometimes it can get a little bit wavy or funky, I guess is the technical term. So we're gonna pre-wash our fabric, and that's gonna loosen up and let the weft and the warp fall back into its natural place of being wonderfully vertical and horizontal. So pre-wash your fabric. You can do that in a gentle cycle, tumble dry, hot cycle, hot dry. It really doesn't matter. It depends on how much you want your fabric to shrink and fade. So don't use super hot boiling water if you care about vibrant colors, because that will fade your fabric. Okay, so that is number one, is to pre-wash your fabric. Oh, let's show you, because this is a metallic fabric. Isn't that nice? You can see that I pre-wash my fabric. You can kind of see that because it's a little bit raggedy on the edge. But we're gonna fix that raggediness. Okay, so what I'm gonna do to get my fabric on grain is I'm gonna grab these scissors, which as quilters we don't use that often because we have wonderful things called rotary cutters, or you know, razor sharp pizza cutters if you want to call it. Okay, ready? I'm going to snip a little bit into that top selvage, just maybe a 1/4 inch from the beginning, and I'm gonna rip it from selvage. Oh, look how far I got. Do you know what that means? That means this fabric was very off grain, because fabric rips on grain. So that means I only got about 8 inches before I gotta do it again. So let's start over. I'm gonna go back in another 1/4, just because I'm doing these little snips because I don't want to waste fabric if I don't have to. Oh, once again, I might have to actually really get in here. So that's another thing, because a lot of times you'll buy fabric off the bolt and you will lose an inch or two trying to get the fabric on grain. Okay, here we go. I feel good about this one. Oh my goodness. This fabric was very off grain. Okay. This is 4th time's a charm. That's what they say. Alrighty. Big money. Hey, look at that. We got all the way from selvage to selvage. So do you know what that means? that means the edge of our fabric is on grain. Oh, it looks a little bit wavy, but that's okay because we know it's on grain, and that's really what matters, because in the end, all of our pieces are going to be wonderfully, wonderfully straight. No bowing. We're going to have no bowing at this fold. Do you see how I lined up selvage to selvage right here? And then that gives me a fold right there. And when I was saying that sometimes you get that bowing, if your fabric is not on grain, which this definitely wasn't, I would get bowing right here at this fold, because it would go from blah, blah, I mean, it would just, you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my cutting mat right now. Isn't this just the prettiest selvage you ever saw? Nice. And I'm gonna show you tip number 2. Wait, pre-washing, ripping, that was tip number 2. I guess I'm just gonna basically show you how I cut, just in case you're a super newbie beginner. If you know how to cut, you're done. Go sew, go cut, do it yourself. Okay, see you at the cutting mat. We're here at our cutting table, and I have my standard 24 by 36 inch cutting mat. I have my favorite rotary cutter, this Olfa rotary cutter. It's a nice kind of ergonomic grip. And I have an Omni Grip ruler. And it's an Omni Grip because it has just a little grippies on this side. It can be a little bit slick still, so you really do have to press down. Okay, I've laid my fabric out. I have selvage to selvage right here. The fold is at the bottom, it's right by me. And my edges are to the left, the edge that we ripped. So it's a little bit ratty, but I'm just gonna clean it up. So it's totally in line with each other. And because of that, look at this beautiful thing. I can line up the fold, and this is pretty much, well, it still looks like it's not. Here we go. The fold right here on my ruler, lining up, is gonna line up with about the edge of the fabric, or pretty close. I'm gonna veer more toward the edge of the fabric because I know that's on grain. So you can always square up as you go. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of trim up this little ratty area. I'm actually gonna line it up a little bit more. Okay, and I cut toward myself with that first initial cut just because I don't want to rotate my cutting mat. So people are gonna say, oh my goodness, you're cutting toward yourself. I'm gonna say, yes, I am. And it's just the way I am. It's just what I do. Okay, so for these strips, you're gonna be cutting a lot. This is my background fabric, or not my background fabric, I'm sorry. It's my color 7 fabric. I'm cutting a lot of 1 1/4 inch strips. This is what I like to do. I cut little bits and I kind of, what do you call that? Kind of scoot, like scoot my hand, kind of like this, do a little scoot dance. Okay, and instead of lifting up my ruler and then lifting up my, my strip, I'm gonna keep going. Okay, so 1 1/4 plus 1 1/4 is 2 1/2. So I line up 2 1/2 with the edge, and I go for it. Okay, and I know 2 1/2 plus 1 1/4 is 3 3/4. So I'm lining up once again 3 3/4 at the edge of my fabric. And I just keep going on down the line. Okay, now we know we're at 5. And that's why this kind of extra wide ruler is really nice. This is an 8 1/2 by 24 inch ruler. And it is pretty nice for this very thing. I'm gonna keep going, 6 1/4. I'm gonna do this until I can't do this anymore. All right, so what are we at, 7 1/2 now? And that'll be my last one. 7 1/2. And I want to show you, you can see, so it was a little bit weird kind of at the beginning, but if you can see lined up on grain, cutting on grain, this is completely perpendicular up and down. Okay, so I'm going to lift up. I'm just going to pull one from the middle. like butter. And if you can see, there's no bowing. So this is just a perfectly straight strip. Whoa, perfectly straight strip. Ta-da, easy peasy, ain't nothing to it. Now go and cut your strips.